Sonia Vance had spent 11 years believing she was ordinary. She believed it when she married Derek at 21, a man who told her she was lucky anyone wanted a woman her size. She believed it when she dropped out of community college to help run his auto dealership paperwork. She believed it every single morning when she woke up in their small suburban house in Oak Ridge, New Jersey, made breakfast for a man who never said thank you, and told herself this was what life looked like for people like her. Today, standing in their living room with a stack of overdue notices fanned out across the coffee table, she was about to stop believing all of it. 6 credit cards, Derek. Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. 6, all maxed out, and this one, she held up a crumpled statement, this one has my name on it. I never opened this account. Derek stood near the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was a tall man, lean, with the kind of sharp good looks that made people trust him on a car lot. But up close, in their own house, the charm was gone. His eyes were bloodshot. His dress shirt was wrinkled from 2 days of wear. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, because sleep meant facing the morning. You don't understand business, Sonia. I told you 100 times. There are short-term losses before the big payoff. What big payoff? She stepped closer, holding the statements out like evidence. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. 3 months! I called the bank yesterday, and they told me something interesting. They told me you refinanced the house 8 months ago. You pulled equity out of our home, Derek, without telling me, without my signature, or at least not one I actually gave. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker, like a card player realizing the table had seen his hand. Who told you to start digging through my finances? Nobody told me. The bank called because we missed another payment. I asked questions. That's all it took. Derek moved off the doorway. He walked toward her slowly, and the air in the room changed the way it does right before a storm breaks, when everything goes still and heavy. You need to stop talking, he said quietly. No, I needed to start talking a long time ago. Sonia held her ground. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her chin up. You've been gambling. I found the receipts. Atlantic City, online poker accounts, private card rooms. You lost everything, and then you started borrowing against things that don't belong to you. Everything in this house belongs to me. This house belongs to both of us. You think you contributed to any of this? He gestured around the room with a sharp sweep of his arm. You answer phones at my dealership. You file papers. You're a secretary, Sonia. You don't get to interrogate me like you're somebody. The words landed the way they always did, heavy and precise. Derek had spent years perfecting the art of making her feel small, and for years it had worked. She would go quiet. She would retreat to the kitchen or the bedroom or the garden and swallow whatever she felt until it dissolved into something she could carry. But today, something in her refused to dissolve. I want to see every account, she said. Every loan, every card, every dollar you moved. And if you forged my signature on anything, Derek, I will go to the police. His hand moved fast. The sound was sharp and flat, like a book slammed shut. Sonia's head turned with the force of it, and for 1 full second, the world went white and ringing. She caught herself on the armrest of the couch, her palm pressing into the fabric, her cheek burning. The room was very quiet. Derek stared at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. And then, tires. The sound came from everywhere at once, a deep, rolling screech of rubber on asphalt that grew louder and louder until it felt like the street itself was being torn open. Sonia straightened up, one hand still on her face, and looked toward the front window. Black cars, one after another, pulling into their quiet suburban street in a precise, military-style formation. Sleek, long-bodied sedans with tinted windows so dark they reflected the afternoon sky like polished obsidian. They filled the road, blocked the driveways, lined up bumper to bumper in a wall of gleaming metal. She counted 10. Derek stumbled backward, his face draining of color. What the? Who are those people? Doors opened simultaneously. From each vehicle, two men emerged in tailored dark suits, moving with coordinated discipline. They fanned out across the lawn, positioned themselves along the sidewalk, and stood perfectly still with their hands clasped in front of them. 20 men, maybe more, every one of them built like a vault door and twice as silent. Then, the lead car's rear door opened, and a young man stepped out. He was maybe 29, 30 at most, tall, dark-haired, wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that fit him like it had been sewn onto his body that morning. He moved with the kind of calm that only comes from absolute authority, the walk of a man who had never once in his life been told to wait. He came up the front steps. The door was unlocked. Sonia realized later she had never heard him knock. He simply appeared in the living room doorway, flanked by two of his men, and scanned the scene with cold, unblinking focus. His gaze moved past Derek like the man was furniture. He looked directly at Sonia. And then, to the shock of everyone in that room, he bowed. A deep, formal, respectful bow, the kind you see in old films about royal courts. He held it for 2 full seconds, then straightened and reached inside his jacket. He produced a small velvet box, opened it, and held it out toward her. Inside was a heavy signet ring, cast in aged silver, bearing an engraved crest, a lion standing over a compass, surrounded by laurel leaves. Sonia's breath caught. She had seen that crest before, once, when she was very young, on a leather journal her mother kept in a locked drawer. She had asked about it, and her mother had changed the subject so fast it left a mark on her memory that never fully healed. "Mrs. Sonia," the young man said. His voice was low, controlled, and carried the weight of something rehearsed 1,000 times. "My name is Damien Cole. I served your father, Arthur Vance, for the last 14 years of his life. He spent every one of those years searching for you." Sonia opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "Your father passed away 3 days ago," Damien continued. "Before he died, he gave me one final instruction. Find his daughter, protect her, and deliver to her what is rightfully hers, the entire Vance estate, its operations, and its legacy." Derek took a step forward. "Now hold on, I don't know who you think you—" Damien didn't look at him. He simply raised one hand, and 2 enforcers moved to either side of Derek with the kind of quiet efficiency that made it clear resistance was not part of the evening's schedule. "You will stay exactly where you are," Damien said, still facing Sonia. "My business is with Mrs. Vance." Sonia stared at the ring. The lion and the compass, the laurel leaves. The weight of a name she had never been told was hers. "I don't understand," she whispered. Damien's expression softened, just barely, just at the edges, and he said, "You will. I promise you. By tomorrow morning you will understand everything." He extended his hand toward the door. "But right now, ma'am, we need to leave this house, and we need to leave immediately." The leather seat of the armoured sedan was cool against Sonia's arms. She sat in the back, hands folded in her lap, watching the streetlights of Oak Ridge slide past the tinted window like amber beads on a string. 2 escort vehicles drove ahead. 2 more followed behind. The rest remained parked on her street, their engines idling, their occupants standing guard over a house she wasn't sure she'd ever return to. Damien sat across from her in a rear-facing seat, his posture relaxed but alert, the way a trained dog rests. Still, composed, but ready to move at the first wrong sound. For the first several minutes, neither of them spoke. Sonia pressed her fingers against her cheek. The sting had faded, but the heat was still there, radiating under her skin like a low ember. She caught Damien glancing at it once, and the muscles along his jaw tightened for just a moment before he looked away. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "Manhattan. I have a secured residence there. Private building, private elevator, full security detail. You'll be safe." "Safe from what?" Damien considered the question carefully. "From the people who've been looking for you almost as long as your father was." Sonia leaned back against the headrest. The car was moving fast now, merging onto the highway, the skyline of the city beginning to glow faintly against the darkening horizon. "I don't have a father," she said. "My mother raised me alone. She worked 2 jobs. She never mentioned anyone named Arthur Vance. She never mentioned a family crest or a logistics company or any of this." "Your mother's name was Catherine, yes?" Sonia's stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" "Because Arthur talked about her, often." Damien reached into a slim briefcase beside his seat and pulled out a worn leather folder. He opened it and handed her a photograph, old, slightly yellowed at the edges but clear enough. A young woman with dark curly hair holding a baby wrapped in a white blanket. Standing beside her was a broad-shouldered man in his 30s with deep-set eyes and a serious mouth, one hand resting gently on the baby's head. Sonia recognized her mother instantly. The man she had never seen before. "That's Arthur," Damien said. "And that baby is you. You were about 4 months old in that picture." She held the photograph with both hands, afraid to bend it, afraid to breathe on it too hard. "They separated when you were still an infant," Damien continued. "The details are complicated, and Arthur never shared all of them with me. What I do know is that your mother left the family under pressure. There were people inside the organization who didn't want Arthur to have an heir, people who had their own plans for succession. Your mother took you and disappeared to protect you. She changed your last name, moved 3 times in 4 years, and cut every connection to Arthur's world." "And he just let her go?" "He searched. For years he searched. Quietly, carefully, through back channels and private investigators. Your mother was very good at staying hidden. She had help from people inside the organization who wanted to keep Arthur's bloodline out of the picture." Damien paused. "Arthur only confirmed your location 18 months ago." Sonia looked up from the photograph. 18 months? He knew where I was for 1.5 years, and he never came? He was already very sick by then, and he was afraid. Damien's voice dropped half a register. Afraid that showing up at your door would bring danger to you before he had the chance to put proper protections in place. So he spent those 18 months building a wall around you that you couldn't see. Legal trusts, financial shields, security protocols. He wanted to make sure that by the time you learned who you were, no one on earth could touch you. The car passed through the Holland Tunnel, and for a long stretch there was only the amber glow of overhead lights and the hum of tires on concrete. "He died 3 days ago," Sonia said softly, more to herself than to Damien. "Pancreatic failure. He went in his sleep at the estate. I was in the room." Damien's voice didn't crack, but it thinned, like a wire pulled too tight. "His last words were your name." Sonia closed her eyes. She thought about her mother, who had died 6 years ago from a stroke. She thought about all the times Catherine had avoided questions about Sonia's father, deflecting with vague answers about a man who wasn't ready to be a family man. She thought about the leather journal with the lion crest that vanished from the house after Catherine's passing, packed away in a box Sonia had never opened because grief made certain drawers impossible to touch. "What about Derek?" she asked, opening her eyes. Damien's expression cooled. "What about him?" "You left men at my house. What happens to him?" "He stays under watch until I decide otherwise. He's not in danger, if that's your concern. My men don't operate that way. But he doesn't leave that house, and he doesn't make any calls." "He'll panic." "He should." Damien pulled a second file from the briefcase, thicker, bound with a rubber band. "Your husband's gambling debts total just over $900,000. He owes money to 4 separate private lenders, 2 of them extremely dangerous. In the last 6 months, he's been making quiet contact with people outside his usual circle, offering to sell personal information about you, your routines, your schedule, your habits, to parties who were willing to pay." Sonia felt the air leave her lungs. "Sell information about me? To who?" "To the same people inside the organization who wanted to keep you from ever claiming your inheritance." Derek didn't know exactly what he was selling or who he was selling it to. He just knew someone was willing to pay cash for details about his wife, and he needed cash more than he needed questions answered. The sedan pulled off the highway and began weaving through the narrow streets of Lower Manhattan. Through the window, Sonia could see the glittering face of a glass tower rising above the surrounding buildings, its top floors dark, its lobby lit with a cold blue glow. "That's the safe house," Damien said. Sonia looked at the tower, then down at the photograph still resting in her hands. Her mother's young face stared back at her, full of something Sonia had never been able to name but could recognize clearly now. Fear and love, in equal measure. She tucked the photograph into her jacket pocket, right against her chest, and stepped out of the car before Damien's men could open the door for her. "I want to see everything," she said. "Every document, every account, every name. I want to know exactly what my father built, exactly what Derek did, and exactly who tried to keep me from finding out." Damien studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she'd met him, the corner of his mouth lifted, just barely. "First thing tomorrow morning," he said. "You have my word." Sonia didn't sleep that night. She tried. The penthouse bed was wide and clean and softer than anything she'd ever owned. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the photograph. Her mother's face, the man standing beside her, the hand resting on a baby's head with a tenderness that didn't match the world Damien had described. By 6 in the morning, she was sitting at the dining table in a borrowed robe, drinking black coffee and staring out at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city looked different from up here, smaller, like something she could hold in her hands and turn over, examining each side. Damien arrived at 7 sharp. He came through the private elevator with 2 people behind him, a woman in her 50s carrying a leather attaché case, and a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses and a laptop bag slung over one shoulder. "Sonia, this is Margaret Calloway, Chief Legal Counsel for the Vance Estate, and this is Orrin Park, the Senior Financial Officer." Damien gestured to each of them as they took seats at the dining table. "They've been managing your father's affairs for the past decade. As of this morning, they answer to you." Margaret placed her attaché on the table and opened it with the precise movements of someone who had done this in 100 boardrooms. She pulled out a thick bound document and slid it across the table. "This is the Master Trust," she said. Her voice was crisp and direct. "Arthur Vance established it 9 years ago with a single beneficiary, you. Upon his death, full ownership of the Vance Corporation and all subsidiary holdings transfers to you automatically. There's no probate, no waiting period, no conditions." Sonia looked at the document without touching it. "What exactly is the Vance Corporation?" Orrin opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. A corporate structure diagram filled the display, a branching tree of entities, subsidiaries, holding companies and partnerships that spread across the screen like the root system of a very old tree. "The Vance Corporation is the parent entity for a private logistics network," Orrin said, adjusting his glasses. "Freight, warehousing, distribution, fleet management. Your father built it from a single trucking route in the Bronx 40 years ago. Today, it operates in 31 states, employs over 4,000 people, and holds long-term contracts with shipping companies across the eastern seaboard. Total asset valuation as of last quarter," Margaret added, "is just under $2.3 billion. The number sat in the air like a physical object. Sonia set her coffee down carefully because her hand had started trembling and she didn't want anyone to see. 2.3 billion. She had spent the last 3 years clipping coupons for groceries and driving a 12-year-old Honda because Derek told her they couldn't afford a new car. "And the other side of the business?" Sonia asked. The room went quiet for a beat. Damien answered. "Your father operated a parallel security and enforcement network alongside the commercial logistics. Private contracts, asset protection, dispute resolution. Some of it fell into grey areas, some of it didn't. Arthur was honest about what he was, and he was careful about how he ran things. He kept the 2 sides of the operation separated by design, clean money on one side, operational muscle on the other." How much of the operation falls into those grey areas now? Less than you'd think. Your father spent his last 5 years pulling the organization toward legitimacy. He shut down the riskier contracts, restructured the enforcement division, and brought in outside compliance auditors. The transition was about 70% complete when he passed. Sonia absorbed this. She looked at Margaret. Am I legally exposed to anything from the remaining 30%? Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, the kind of reaction a lawyer gives when a client asks exactly the right question. The trust structure insulates you from legacy liabilities. Arthur made sure of that. You inherit the assets, not the history. Good. Sonia pulled the master trust document toward her and opened it to the first page. Now tell me about Derek. Damien reached into a bag one of his men carried in and placed a second folder on the table. This one was red and considerably thicker than the one from last night. We started the audit at 4 this morning, he said. Oren's team pulled every financial record connected to Derek Harlan. Personal accounts, business accounts, credit lines, loan applications, property filings. All of it. Oren took over, scrolling through a spreadsheet on his laptop. Your husband opened 6 credit accounts over the past 2 years, using your social security number and forged authorization documents. Total outstanding balance across those accounts is approximately $412,000. In addition, he refinanced your home in Oak Ridge 8 months ago, pulling out $320,000 in equity. That money was deposited into a personal account you were not listed on and was spent within 11 weeks. Spent on what? Gambling losses, primarily. Online platforms, 2 private card rooms in Atlantic City, and a high-stakes poker circuit that runs out of a hotel in Newark. Oren paused. There's also a wire transfer of $60,000 to an offshore account we're still tracing. Damien's team believes this is connected to the information sales he mentioned last night. Sonia's jaw tightened. 11 years of marriage, and she had never once been given access to Derek's personal accounts. He told her the dealership finances were complicated, that she wouldn't understand them, that her job was to handle the filing and leave the numbers to him. And she had accepted it. Year after year, she had accepted it. That acceptance ended in this room. What do we do about it? She asked. Damien leaned forward, forearms on the table. I have a plan. I've been putting it together since before I came to your house yesterday. I call it Operation Dismantle. Tell me. We freeze every joint account immediately. Margaret's team files fraud complaints with the issuing banks on the forged credit accounts, which triggers automatic holds and investigation. Oren contacts the mortgage lender and presents evidence that the refinancing documents carry a forged co-borrower signature, which voids the loan and puts Derek on the hook for the full amount. And my corporate attorneys visit Derek's auto dealership this afternoon. Why the dealership? A thin smile crossed Damien's face. Because the land under that dealership has been owned by a Vance Corporation holding company for the past 12 years. Your father bought it quietly through a subsidiary as part of a larger commercial real estate portfolio. Derek's been leasing that land without ever knowing who his landlord actually was. His lease contains a standard breach of contract clause tied to financial misconduct. As of this morning, he's in breach. Margaret slid a single sheet of paper across the table. A termination notice, already drafted, already dated. All I need, she said, is your signature. Sonia picked up the pen Margaret offered. She thought about every coupon she'd clipped. Every time Derek told her she didn't understand business. Every time he looked at her body with that particular expression, the one that said she should be grateful he stayed. She signed. Start with the dealership, she said. I want him to feel it by lunch. Derek Harlan had been pacing his living room since dawn. The 2 men Damien left behind stood outside, one at the front door, one at the back, and hadn't moved or spoken in 12 hours. Derek tried talking to them twice. The first time, he demanded to know who they worked for. The second time, he threatened to call the police. Both times, the men looked at him the way someone looks at a clock that's running slow. Acknowledgement without interest. By 9 in the morning, the guards were gone. They left without a word, climbing into one of the remaining black sedans and pulling away from the curb in silence. Derek watched from the window until the car turned the corner, then immediately grabbed his phone. No signal. He tried the landline. Dead. He checked his laptop. The Wi-Fi was working, but when he tried to log into his bank accounts, every single one came back with the same message. Account temporarily frozen. Contact your financial institution. All 6 of them. Derek slammed the laptop shut and sat on the edge of the couch, breathing hard. His mind raced through the possibilities, trying to arrange the pieces into something that made sense. Sonia's father was some kind of crime boss. That much he'd gathered from the way Damien's men carried themselves. The signet ring, the armored cars, the coordinated arrival. This wasn't law enforcement. This was something older and deeper and far more dangerous than any debt collector he'd ever dealt with. But Derek was a salesman. He'd spent 20 years reading people, finding angles, talking his way into and out of situations that would have buried lesser men. He could work this. He just needed to get to the dealership, move some inventory, pull cash from the weekend deposits before anyone else got to the safe, and disappear. He knew a guy in Miami who could set him up with new documents. He knew another guy who could get him on a cargo flight to the Caribbean with no questions asked. All he needed was 48 hours and enough cash to buy his way out. He grabbed his keys and drove to Newark. The dealership sat on a 2-acre lot along a commercial stretch of Route 21, sandwiched between a tire warehouse and a fast food restaurant. Derek had owned the business for 9 years, or thought he had. He'd built it from a small used car operation into a mid-tier luxury dealership that moved 60 to 70 vehicles a month. It was the one thing in his life he'd built with his own hands. The one thing he pointed to when he needed to remind himself he was somebody. He pulled into the lot at 10:15, parked in his usual spot near the side entrance, and walked through the service bay toward his office. The mechanics were working. The showroom lights were on. Everything looked normal. Until he opened his office door. 3 people were sitting inside, 2 men and a woman, all in dark suits, all with briefcases open on his desk. Behind them, standing near the window with his hands in his pockets, was a 4th man Derek didn't recognize. Tall, grey-haired, with the kind of posture that suggested he'd spent decades in rooms where people listened when he spoke. "Mr. Harlan," the woman said. She didn't stand. "Please sit down." "Who are you? How did you get into my office?" "My name is Patricia Devlin. I'm a corporate attorney with Callaway & Stern, representing the Vance Corporation." She gestured to the chair across from her. "I strongly recommend you sit down." Derek looked at the grey-haired man by the window. The man looked back with an expression of polished disinterest. Derek sat. Patricia opened a folder and placed a document in front of him. "This is the original lease agreement for the land on which this dealership operates. You signed it 9 years ago with a company called Ridgeline Holdings LLC. Are you familiar with that entity?" "That's my landlord. I've been paying rent to them every month for 9 years. Ridgeline Holdings is a subsidiary of the Vance Corporation. It has been since its incorporation in 2008. The land beneath this dealership, the parking structure to the east, and the service facility to the north are all owned by the Vance Corporation through Ridgeline." Derek stared at the document. The words were there, printed clearly, but his brain refused to process them. His landlord, the faceless LLC he'd been mailing checks to for nearly a decade, was connected to the same people who had surrounded his house yesterday. "That's a coincidence," he said, though his voice had lost most of its confidence. "It is not a coincidence, Mr. Harlan." Patricia pulled out a second document. "This is a termination notice for your lease, effective immediately. Section 14 of your lease agreement contains a breach of contract clause triggered by documented financial misconduct, including fraud, forgery, or misrepresentation of fiduciary obligations. As of this morning, we have confirmed evidence that you engaged in all 3. "You can't do this. I have rights. I have a lease." "You had a lease. The breach clause allows for immediate termination with documented cause. The documentation is extensive." She tapped the folder. forged credit applications in your wife's name, unauthorized refinancing of a jointly held property, fraudulent loan submissions using falsified income statements from this dealership. Would you like me to continue? Derek's mouth opened and closed twice before any words came out. I want to call my lawyer. You're welcome to, but I should inform you that this termination is already filed with the county clerk's office as of 8:45 this morning. Your inventory will be catalogued and held in escrow pending resolution of the fraud claims. Your employees will be offered temporary positions through a Vance Corporation staffing subsidiary, and your access to this facility ends at 5 o'clock today. Derek looked around his office. The framed photos on the wall, the awards from the Regional Auto Dealers Association, the coffee mug his sales manager had given him as a joke 3 Christmases ago, the one that said, "World's okayest boss." 9 years of his life, sitting in a room that no longer belonged to him. This is because of Sonia, he said quietly. This is all because of her. The grey-haired man by the window spoke for the first time. His voice was calm and unhurried. This is because of you, Mr. Harlan. Every document in that folder carries your signature. Every fraud has your fingerprints. The only person who put you in this chair is the one sitting in it. Derek's hands were trembling. He pressed them flat against his knees to stop the shaking, but it didn't help. What am I supposed to do? He asked. The question came out smaller than he intended. Patricia closed her folder and stood. That is entirely your problem, Mr. Harlan. We're finished here. She walked out. The 2 men followed. The grey-haired man lingered by the window for a moment, looking out at the lot full of polished cars gleaming in the midday sun, then left without another word. Derek sat alone in his office for a long time. Then he picked up his personal phone. His signal had returned the moment the guards left Oak Ridge, and dialed a number he'd promised himself he would never use again. It's Derek, he said when the line connected. I need a boat, tonight. The Vance estate sat on 40 acres of rolling countryside, 2 hours north of Manhattan, hidden behind a wall of old-growth oaks and a gated entrance that gave nothing away from the road. The main house was stone and timber, built in the 1940s, with deep porches and tall windows that looked out over a private lake. It was the kind of place that whispered money rather than shouting it. Old, quiet, permanent. Sonia stepped out of the car and stood on the gravel drive for a moment, taking it in. The morning air smelled like cut grass and wood smoke. Somewhere behind the house, she could hear water running, a creek or a fountain, she couldn't tell. The grounds were immaculate, tended by people she couldn't see, maintained with a precision that suggested decades of routine. This had been her father's home. The man in the photograph. The man who searched for her for years from inside these walls, looking out these same windows, walking these same paths. She pressed her hand against the photograph in her jacket pocket and kept walking. Damien led her through the front entrance and down a wide corridor lined with oil paintings and polished wood paneling. Staff members, housekeepers, groundskeepers, a woman carrying a tray of pressed linens paused as they passed. Each one looked at Sonia with an expression she couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition. As if they'd been told she was coming long before she knew she existed. The meeting was held in a private dining room at the rear of the house. A long oak table stretched across the center, surrounded by 12 leather chairs. 8 of them were occupied. Damien made the introductions one by one. There was Margaret, whom Sonia had already met. Oren was there as well, laptop open, numbers ready. The remaining 6 were senior directors of the Vance organization, men and women who had managed divisions of the empire for decades. Shipping coordinators, fleet managers, regional operations chiefs, security directors. Each of them shook Sonia's hand politely, but she could feel the assessments happening behind their eyes. They were measuring her, weighing her against whatever image of Arthur Vance's daughter they'd carried in their heads. Damien stood at the head of the table and addressed the room. 3 days ago, Arthur Vance passed away. His instructions were clear and documented in a legally binding trust that Margaret's firm has verified independently. Sonia Vance is the sole heir and rightful owner of every asset, entity, and operation under the Vance Corporation umbrella. As of this morning, she holds full authority over this organization. I expect every person at this table to extend to her the same loyalty and respect they gave to Arthur. The room was quiet for a moment. Then a man near the far end of the table leaned forward. His name was Garrett, mid-60s, silver-haired, with thick forearms and a face that looked like it had been carved from the side of a building. He ran the Northeast Distribution Corridor, the most profitable arm of the logistics network. "Damien, nobody here is questioning Arthur's wishes," Garrett said. His voice was measured, diplomatic, but there was weight behind it. "We all respected Arthur. We all served him faithfully. But you're asking us to hand full operational control to someone who, until yesterday, didn't know this organization existed." A woman across the table nodded. Her name was Renata, and she oversaw the financial compliance division. She was younger than Garrett, maybe 50, with sharp cheekbones and reading glasses perched on her head like a crown. "Garrett's right," Renata said. "This is a $2 billion operation. We have contracts with deadlines, partners who expect consistency, and competitors who would love to see us stumble during a transition. Sonia, I mean no disrespect, but what is your background? What have you managed before?" Sonia felt the room tilt toward a familiar feeling, the sensation of being looked at and found insufficient. She'd lived inside that feeling for 11 years with Derek. She knew its dimensions, its texture, the way it tried to shrink her down to a size that was easier for other people to handle. She let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then she spoke. "I managed Derek Harlan's auto dealership for 9 years," she said. "Every piece of paper that moved through that business passed through my hands. I processed payroll for 26 employees, reconciled monthly inventory reports, handled vendor contracts, and maintained compliance filings with the state. I did it without a title, without a salary that reflected the work, and without a single word of acknowledgement from the man who took credit for all of it." She paused and looked directly at Garrett. "2 days ago, I sat down with financial records I'd never been allowed to see and identified 6 fraudulent credit accounts, a forged mortgage refinance, and a pattern of embezzlement that your senior financial officer confirmed within hours. I didn't need anyone to walk me through it. I read the numbers, and the numbers told me the truth." Garrett held her gaze but said nothing. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend I understand every piece of this organization," Sonia continued. "I don't. I've had 48 hours to learn about a world my mother spent my entire childhood hiding me from. But I know how to read a balance sheet. I know how to spot a lie in a contract. And I know that my father spent the last years of his life making sure this moment would happen, which means he believed I could handle it." She looked at Renata. "If you have concerns about my competence, bring them to me directly and I'll address them. If you have suggestions for how to manage this transition, I want to hear them. But if anyone in this room is waiting for me to step aside and let someone else sit in this chair, that is not going to happen." The room was very still. Damien hadn't moved from his position at the head of the table. He stood with his arms at his sides, watching the directors' faces with the focused attention of a man cataloguing every reaction for future reference. When Sonia finished speaking, he let the silence breathe for a moment before adding his own weight to it. "Arthur Vance built this organization from a single truck and a borrowed map," he said. "He trusted me with his life, and he trusted his daughter with his legacy. Anyone who has a problem with that arrangement is welcome to resign. Tonight, with my full assistance in packing their things." The offer hung in the air like a lit match. Garrett looked at Damien, then at Sonia. Then he leaned back in his chair and folded his thick arms across his chest. "I ran Arthur's freight corridor for 22 years, he said slowly. "I'm not going anywhere. But I want a seat at the planning table, and I want to be heard when I have concerns." "You'll have both," Sonia said. Renata removed her glasses from her head and set them on the table. "I'll need access to the full financial picture before I can sign off on any restructuring. Everything. No locked files, no restricted folders. Done, Sonia said. Oren will give you full access by end of day. One by one, the remaining directors nodded, some grudgingly, some with visible relief, all with the cautious respect of people who recognized that the ground beneath them had shifted, and the smartest move was to plant their feet and hold steady. Damien caught Sonia's eye from across the table. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. The room was hers. The study was on the second floor of the estate, tucked behind a heavy oak door at the end of a corridor lined with bookshelves. It smelled like old leather and pipe tobacco, a scent Sonia had never encountered before, but somehow recognized, the way certain songs feel familiar even when you're hearing them for the first time. Arthur Vance's desk sat beneath a wide window overlooking the lake. It was a massive piece of furniture, dark walnut, with brass handles on the drawers and a green glass lamp positioned at the corner. The surface was bare, except for a framed photograph, the same one Damien had shown her in the car, her mother holding her as a baby, Arthur's hand resting on her head. He had kept it on his desk, right where he could see it every day. Sonia sat down in his chair and ran her fingers along the edge of the desk. The wood was smooth from decades of use, worn in the places where his arms would have rested, where his hands would have reached for a pen or turned a page. She sat there for a long moment, feeling the shape of a man she would never meet through the furniture he had touched 10,000 times. Then she opened the files. Oren had prepared everything she asked for. 3 banker's boxes filled with documents, organized chronologically and cross-referenced with digital records on a secure laptop. The first box contained Derek's personal financial history going back 5 years. The second held records from the dealership. The third was a collection of filings, applications, and correspondence that Oren's team had pulled from banks, credit agencies, and county offices over the past 36 hours. Sonia started with the credit accounts. She had known about the 6 forged cards since the meeting in Manhattan. What she hadn't known, what became clear as she spread the statements across the desk, was the pattern behind them. Derek hadn't opened them all at once. He had started small, 2.5 years ago, with a single store credit card carrying a modest limit. He used her social security number and a version of her signature that was close enough to pass a casual review. When that card went unpaid, he opened a second, then a third. Each one slightly larger, each one bolder. By the 6th account, he was applying for platinum-tier cards with limits above $50,000, using fabricated income statements that listed Sonia as a co-owner of the dealership, a title she had never held. She made notes in the margins of each statement with a pencil she found in Arthur's desk drawer. Dates, amounts, patterns. The methodical habits of a woman who had spent a decade organizing someone else's paperwork now turned inward, applied to the architecture of her own betrayal. The mortgage was worse. Derek had refinanced their Oak Ridge home 8 months ago through a small regional bank that didn't require in-person verification for existing customers. He had submitted the application online, uploaded a scanned copy of Sonia's driver's license, which he had access to since they shared a filing cabinet, and forged her electronic signature on the closing documents. The bank released $320,000 into an account held solely in Derek's name at a different institution. Sonia traced the money from that account through a series of withdrawals. Large cash pulls at ATMs near Atlantic City. Wire transfers to online gambling platforms registered in Malta and Curaçao. A single $60,000 transfer to an offshore account whose holder was listed only as a numbered entity. That last transfer made her stop. She pulled the laptop closer and opened the file Oren had flagged with a red tab. The offshore account had received exactly one deposit, Derek's $60,000, and had been opened only 3 days before the transfer. The account holder's mailing address traced back to a P.O. box in Delaware, and the authorization documents carried a name Sonia didn't recognize, Hadley Group LLC. She wrote the name on a separate piece of paper and circled it. 2 hours later, when Damien knocked on the study door, Sonia had covered the desk with a web of documents, notes, and highlighted printouts that mapped the full scope of Derek's financial destruction. She had kicked off her shoes at some point without noticing, and her hair was pulled back with a pencil jammed through a loose bun. "You've been in here since 4, Damien said from the doorway. "It's almost 7. "I know." She didn't look up. "Come look at this." Damien crossed the room and stood beside the desk. Sonia pointed to the timeline she'd built on a legal pad, a handwritten chart tracking every fraudulent account, every forged signature, every dollar that moved from their shared life into Derek's private spiral. "He started small and escalated," she said. "The first card was a test. When nobody caught it, he got bolder. By the time he refinanced the house, he wasn't even being careful anymore. The bank signatures don't match mine at all. He was rushing." Damien studied the timeline, his eyes moving across the dates and figures with quiet intensity. "And this," Sonia said, tapping the circled name on the separate sheet. "Hadley Group. $60,000 wired to an offshore shell company 3 days after it was created. That's not gambling money. That's a payment." "Payment for what?" "For selling me. You told me in the car that Derek was offering information about me to people inside the organization. If he was being paid through a shell company, then whoever was buying that information didn't want their name attached to the transaction. They're hiding." Damien picked up the sheet and read the name again. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recognition. A connection being made that he filed away without sharing. "I'll have Oren trace the Hadley Group by morning," he said. "If it connects to anyone inside the organization, we'll know within 24 hours. Sonia leaned back in Arthur's chair and looked at the photograph on the desk. Her mother's face, her father's hand. The baby in the white blanket who grew up never knowing any of this was waiting for her. "I want to authorize the rest of it," she said. "The rest of what?" "Everything you planned, the full dismantling, every asset Derek touched, every account he opened, every deal he made with my name attached to it. I want it all unwound. I want him to wake up tomorrow with nothing left to sell, nothing left to borrow against, and nowhere left to hide." Damien studied her for a moment. "Once we start the final phase, there's no pulling it back. His credit will be destroyed, his business reputation will be finished. Every professional relationship he's built over the past decade will collapse within a week. He'll have nothing." "He had nothing the day he married me," Sonia said. "He just used me to pretend otherwise." She picked up the pencil from the desk and signed the authorization form Damien had brought with him, adding her name beneath the line in firm, deliberate strokes. "And Damien?" "Yes?" "Find out who's behind the Hadley Group, because whoever paid Derek for my information is still out there, and they're going to find out very soon that the woman they were trying to bury just inherited everything they wanted." Derek had always been good at running. Not the physical kind, he'd never been much of an athlete, but the other kind. The kind where you feel the ground cracking beneath you and you find the nearest door before anyone notices you're gone. He'd done it in college when his grades collapsed. He'd done it with his first business partner, walking away overnight with the client list and half the inventory. He'd done it in his marriage every time Sonia got too close to the truth, deflecting with charm or cruelty, depending on which tool was closer to hand. Now, sitting in the passenger seat of a rented sedan heading south on I-95 toward the Connecticut coast, Derek was running again. This time, he was running from people who didn't leave doors open. The plan was simple. 8 months ago, when his gambling debts started climbing past the point of recovery, Derek had quietly arranged a backup exit. A man he'd met at a private card room in Newark, a broker of sorts, the kind of person who could get things done without asking questions, had connected him with a yacht charter service in Greenwich that operated on a cash-only, no-paperwork basis. For $30,000, Derek could board a 40-foot motor yacht, cross into international waters, and connect with a cargo vessel heading to the Bahamas. From there, he could disappear. The $30,000 was a problem. His accounts were frozen, his dealership was gone, and the cash he'd kept hidden in a floor safe at the lot had been seized during the inventory cataloging. He had exactly $600 in his wallet, and a gold watch he'd bought himself 3 years ago that might fetch another $2,000 if he found the right buyer. But the yacht was already paid for. He'd made the deposit months ago, using a credit account he'd opened in Sonia's name with her forged signature. The remaining balance was due on arrival, but Derek figured he could talk his way past that. He'd always been able to talk his way past things. He arrived at the Greenwich Marina at 9:15 in the morning. The harbour was wide and calm, lined with white-hulled sailboats and gleaming cruisers that bobbed gently in the early tide. Seagulls circled overhead. A few dock workers moved between the slips, coiling ropes and hosing down decks. The air smelled like salt and diesel and money. Derek parked the rental car in the visitor lot and walked towards slip 14, where the yacht was supposed to be waiting. He could see it from 50 yards away, a sleek white vessel with a dark blue hull stripe, its engines already idling, its captain visible on the upper deck checking instruments. He was 20 steps from the gangway when he heard footsteps behind him. Measured, unhurried, perfectly synchronized. Derek turned around. Damien Cole stood on the dock, hands in the pockets of a navy overcoat, the morning light catching the sharp lines of his jaw. Behind him, 4 of his men were positioned at even intervals along the marina walkway, blocking every path back to the parking lot. 2 more stood at the far end of the dock near the harbourmaster's office. One was leaning against Derek's rental car. "Beautiful morning for a boat ride," Damien said. Derek's mouth went dry. He looked toward the yacht. The captain on the upper deck had turned away and was climbing down the ladder. A moment later, he stepped onto the dock, walked past Derek without making eye contact, and disappeared between 2 storage buildings. The yacht's engines shut off. "That charter was booked 4 months ago under a fraudulent account using your wife's identity," Damien said, walking toward Derek with the casual pace of a man who had all the time in the world. "The deposit was made with stolen funds. The broker who arranged it has been very cooperative since my people visited him last night. Turns out he keeps detailed records when he thinks no one is watching." Derek took a step backward and bumped into a dock piling. "Listen, whatever Sonia told you, whatever she thinks happened, there's more to the story. She doesn't understand the pressure I've been under, the debts, the people I owe. You don't know what they're like." "I know exactly what they're like," Damien said. "I've spent the last 18 months tracking every one of them. 3 private lenders in Atlantic City, a poker syndicate operating out of a Newark hotel, and a very unpleasant individual in Miami who's been charging you 40% weekly interest on a $100,000 marker." He paused. "You're right about one thing. Those people are dangerous, which is why it's remarkable that you chose to borrow from them using your wife as collateral." "I never put her at risk." "You sold her daily schedule to strangers for $60,000, Derek. You told them where she shopped, what time she left the house, which routes she drove. You handed them a map to a woman you were supposed to protect because you needed money to cover a poker debt." Derek said nothing. His right hand was shaking. He pressed it against his thigh. Damien reached inside his coat and produced a manila envelope. He held it out toward Derek. "Inside this envelope are 3 things. The first is a complete set of federal fraud charges prepared by the Vance Corporation's legal counsel and ready to be filed with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Identity theft, bank fraud, wire fraud, mortgage fraud. Combined, they carry a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years. Derek stared at the envelope like it was a living thing. "The second is an unconditional divorce decree. It grants Sonia full and permanent dissolution of the marriage, waives all claims you might have to any shared or individual assets, and bars you from contacting her by any means for the rest of your natural life." Derek's lips moved, but no sound came out. "The third is a comprehensive asset surrender agreement. Every property, every vehicle, every account, every business interest you've ever touched, all of it transfers to the Vance estate immediately upon your signature." Damien stepped forward and placed the envelope against Derek's chest. "You have a choice. Sign everything in this envelope, walk away with nothing, and the fraud charges stay in the filing cabinet. Or refuse, and these documents go to the federal prosecutor before sunset. I should tell you that the evidence package runs to over 400 pages, and our attorneys have a flawless conviction record." Derek took the envelope with both hands. His fingers left damp prints on the paper. If I sign, what happens to me? You leave, on foot, with whatever is in your wallet and whatever clothes you're wearing. You start over, somewhere far from here, and you never speak Sonia's name again. That's the deal. And if I need time to think about it? Damien looked at his watch. I have a car waiting to take you to a law office in Stamford, where the signing will take place. The drive is 32 minutes. You can think about it on the way. He turned and walked back toward his men, leaving Derek standing alone on the dock with the envelope pressed against his chest, the empty yacht rocking gently in its slip, and the entire Atlantic Ocean stretching out before him like a door that had just been locked. Derek looked at the water for a long time. Then he followed Damien to the car. The law offices of Callaway and Stern occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Stamford that overlooked the Long Island Sound. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor took 41 seconds. Derek counted every one of them. Damien stood beside him in the elevator, silent, his reflection sharp in the polished steel doors. 2 of his men rode in a second elevator. Margaret Callaway was already upstairs, having arrived an hour earlier to prepare the conference room and lay out the documents in the precise order they would need to be signed. The doors opened onto a reception area floored in white marble and furnished with the kind of understated elegance that told visitors, before a single word was spoken, that the people who worked here charged $900 an hour and were worth every cent. A receptionist led them down a long hallway to a corner conference room. The space was wide and bright, with windows on 2 sides and a table long enough to seat 16. Margaret sat at the far end, flanked by 2 junior attorneys. Orrin was there as well, his laptop open, a stack of tabbed folders arranged in front of him like a surgeon's instruments. A single chair waited at the near end of the table, empty, positioned so that whoever sat in it would face the entire room with nowhere to look but forward. Derek sat down. Margaret didn't waste time with pleasantries. She opened the first folder and slid a document across the polished surface. "This is the divorce decree," she said. "It dissolves your marriage to Sonia Vance, effective immediately upon signature. Under its terms, you waive all spousal claims to property, income, inheritance, and any future earnings associated with the Vance estate or its subsidiaries. You also agree to a permanent no-contact order, which prohibits you from approaching, calling, writing, or communicating with Sonia through any intermediary for the remainder of your life." Derek picked up the document and read the first page. His eyes moved across the words, but Sonia could have told anyone watching that he wasn't actually reading. She'd seen him do this 1,000 times at the dealership, scanning paperwork with the appearance of diligence, while his mind was somewhere else entirely. Calculating angles, weighing options, looking for the gap in the fence. There was no gap in this fence. "And if I refuse to sign this one?" Derek asked, setting the document down. Margaret folded her hands on the table. "Then the divorce proceeds through standard legal channels, which, in the state of New Jersey, takes approximately 12 to 14 months. During that time, the fraud charges in the envelope Damien gave you will be filed with the federal prosecutor. Given the volume of evidence, an indictment would likely come within 60 days. You would spend the duration of the divorce proceedings preparing for a criminal trial that, based on our assessment, you would lose." Derek looked at Damien, who stood near the window with his arms crossed, watching the exchange the way a man watches a clock count down to an hour he already knows is coming. "Next document," Margaret said, sliding a second folder forward. "This is the Comprehensive Asset Surrender Agreement. It covers every piece of property, every vehicle, every financial instrument, and every business interest currently held in your name or jointly with Sonia. Upon signature, ownership of all listed assets transfers immediately and irrevocably to the Vance estate. What's left for me? Personal effects, clothing, toiletries, and any items of purely sentimental value that are not connected to fraudulent purchases. Everything else is listed in Exhibit C." She tapped a section near the back of the folder. "The Oak Ridge house, the 3 vehicles registered in your name, the contents of your personal investment account, which currently holds $1,100, and any remaining interest in the dealership property or inventory. Derek let out a short, hollow breath. $1,100. A year ago, he had been sitting at a poker table in Atlantic City with 140,000 in chips stacked in front of him, feeling like the king of every room he'd ever walked into. He lost it all in 4 hours. He had walked out of that casino at 3 in the morning, stood in the parking garage and punched the concrete wall until his knuckles bled. Then he drove home, climbed into bed beside Sonia, and told her the next morning that the dealership had its best sales week in months. That was the thing about lying. It didn't start with a decision, it started with a feeling. The feeling that the truth was too heavy to carry, so you set it down somewhere out of sight and picked up something lighter. And then the lighter version became the version you lived inside, and the truth became a stranger you kept avoiding at parties. Now the truth was sitting across from him in a conference room, wearing a tailored suit and reading glasses, and it had brought lawyers.
Third document, Margaret said. This is a sworn affidavit acknowledging your involvement in identity fraud, mortgage fraud, and unauthorized financial transactions conducted in Sonia Vance's name. Signing this affidavit provides the Vance legal team with a voluntary confession that can be used to pursue civil recovery of all misappropriated funds. In exchange for signing, the criminal fraud referral will be held in reserve and will only be submitted if you violate any term of the divorce decree or the asset surrender agreement. Derek read the affidavit. This one he actually read, every word, because it was the one that would follow him for the rest of his life. It laid out his crimes in clean, clinical language, each forged signature, each fabricated document, each dollar stolen from a woman who trusted him. Seeing it written down, organized and numbered, made it real in a way that his own memory never had. In his head, the fraud had always been temporary, a bridge to get him to the next good hand, the next big sale, the next lucky break that would make it all disappear. On paper, it was permanent. He signed the affidavit first, then the asset surrender, then the divorce decree. 3 signatures, 3 documents, 3 folders closed and stacked at Margaret's end of the table like chapters of a book that had just been finished. Margaret collected the documents and handed them to one of her junior attorneys, who left the room immediately. Oren closed his laptop. The room began to empty with the quiet efficiency of people who had done exactly what they came to do and had no interest in lingering. Derek remained in his chair. Damien walked to the table and placed a plain white envelope in front of him. Derek opened it. Inside was a bus ticket from Stamford to Philadelphia, departing in 90 minutes. There's a shelter on North Broad Street that takes walk-ins, Damien said. They'll give you a bed and a meal while you figure out your next move. Derek stared at the bus ticket. A year ago, he had driven a black Mercedes to a private card game in a penthouse suite overlooking the Hudson River. Now he was holding a one-way Greyhound ticket and directions to a homeless shelter.
"She won't forgive me," Derek said. "Even after all this, she won't." Damien buttoned his coat and turned toward the door. "She doesn't need to," he said. "She's already past you." He walked out of the conference room and left Derek sitting alone at the long, empty table with a bus ticket in one hand and nothing in the other. Vance Tower rose 44 stories above Midtown Manhattan, its dark glass facade reflecting the morning skyline like a second city folded into the first. The building carried no external signage, no logo, no nameplate, no indication of what happened inside. Arthur Vance had designed it that way on purpose. He believed that real power didn't need to announce itself, and 30 years later, his building still proved him right. Sonia had seen it from the outside once before, 2 days ago, through the window of Damien's sedan as they drove through the city. She had looked up at it without knowing it belonged to her. Now she was walking through the lobby with her name on the deed and her father's signet ring on her right hand, and the security team at the front desk stood when she entered, every single one of them. Damien walked beside her, matching her pace. He had been quieter than usual this morning, and Sonia had noticed. During the car ride from the estate, he had taken 2 phone calls, both brief, both conducted in a low voice she couldn't make out over the engine noise.
When she asked if everything was handled, he said yes, but his jaw stayed tight in a way that told her there was something still unresolved. She didn't press. She was learning that Damien operated on a schedule of disclosure that was precise and deliberate. He shared information when the timing served her, and he held it back when knowing too early would be a distraction. She didn't love that quality, but she respected it. Arthur had trusted this man with his life. That trust had to be worth something, even if it meant tolerating silences she would have preferred filled. The grand boardroom occupied the entire northeast corner of the 42nd floor. It was a massive space, long enough to echo, wide enough to seat 40, and decorated with the kind of restrained authority that made people straighten their posture the moment they walked in. Dark wood paneling, a conference table cut from a single slab of black walnut that must have taken 6 men to carry. Recessed lighting that cast everything in a warm, golden tone, as if the room itself was designed to make difficult conversations feel civilized. 14 people were already seated when Sonia and Damien entered. The 8 senior directors from the estate meeting 2 days ago, plus 6 additional division heads who had been summoned from regional offices in Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Richmond, Atlanta, and Chicago. These were the people who kept the Vance machine running, the ones who managed the trucks, negotiated the contracts, maintained the relationships with port authorities and shipping companies and warehouse operators across the eastern seaboard. Sonia recognized Garrett and Renata from the earlier meeting. Garrett gave her a slight nod as she took her seat at the head of the table. Renata was already reviewing something on her tablet, her glasses back on her head in their usual position. Damien remained standing. He unbuttoned his jacket, placed both hands flat on the table, and addressed the room. Derek Harlan signed a full divorce decree, asset surrender, and fraud affidavit yesterday afternoon in Stamford. The documents have been filed. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Sonia Vance has no legal ties to Derek Harlan, and every asset he touched has been recovered or frozen pending transfer. The matter is closed. He paused to let that settle, then continued. The signed legal transfers are in the binders in front of you. Page 1 is the master trust confirmation. Page 12 is the asset recovery summary. Page 31 is the organizational authority charter, which formally designates Sonia Vance as the sole executive authority of the Vance Corporation and all subsidiary entities. He looked around the table. I'll give you a few minutes to review. The room filled with the sound of pages turning. Sonia watched the directors read, their eyes moving across the legal language with the practiced fluency of people who had spent their careers navigating documents exactly like these. Some nodded as they read. Others made small marks in the margins with pens. One man, a heavy-set operations chief from Baltimore named Franklin, read the entire binder cover to cover without looking up once. When the reading was done, Damien spoke again. Before we move to questions, I want to address something directly. He straightened and clasped his hands behind his back. I know that some of you have reservations about this transition. I know that Arthur's passing was sudden and that the idea of a new leader, someone from outside the organization, creates uncertainty. That uncertainty is reasonable. I'm not asking you to pretend it doesn't exist. He looked at Garrett, then at Renata, then at each face around the table in turn. What I am asking is that you judge Sonia Vance by what she does from this point forward. In 5 days, she has identified and documented a comprehensive fraud committed against her by her own husband, authorized and overseen the legal and financial dismantling of that fraud, and stood in front of this organization's senior leadership and earned the room's respect on the strength of her own words. Arthur searched for his daughter for over a decade. When he found her, he didn't hesitate. He named her his heir because he knew exactly what she was made of. I am asking you to trust his judgment the way I do. Sonia felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room turn toward her. She had prepared remarks, a short speech she'd written at Arthur's desk the night before, outlining her respect for the organization and her commitment to learning its operations from the inside. But sitting here now, at the head of a table her father had built, she realized that the speech felt wrong, too polished, too careful.
These people had spent decades reading intentions behind words, and they would spot rehearsed language the way Garrett would spot a counterfeit shipping manifest. She set her notes aside. "My father and I never met," she said. "I'm going to carry that with me for a long time, maybe forever. I can't change it, and I won't pretend it doesn't hurt." The room was very quiet. "What I can tell you is that everything I've learned about Arthur Vance in the last 5 days tells me he built something extraordinary. He built it with discipline, with loyalty, and with people he trusted enough to share the weight. You are those people. Every single person at this table kept this organization running while my father was sick, while he was grieving, while he was spending his last energy trying to find me. You did that. And I am not going to walk in here and pretend I don't need you, because I do." She looked around the table slowly. "I need Garrett's experience. I need Renata's financial eye. I need Franklin's operations knowledge and every piece of institutional memory that the rest of you carry. This organization is not mine to run alone, and I have no intention of trying. But I am the person Arthur chose, and I am going to honor that choice by showing up every single day and doing the work." She placed her hands flat on the table, the signet ring catching the light. "So, are we together on this?" Garrett was the first to speak. "Together," he said. The word came out solid, like a handshake. Renata followed. "Together." Franklin looked up from his binder for the first time and gave a single, firm nod. One by one, around the table, each director spoke the word or nodded their agreement. The sound of it built like a wave, quiet at first, then steady, then full. By the time it reached the last person, a young logistics coordinator from Atlanta, who couldn't have been older than 30, the room had settled into something that felt permanent. Damien caught Sonia's eye from across the table. The tight line of his jaw had softened, and for the second time since she'd known him, she saw the faintest trace of a smile. The meeting continued for another 2 hours. Renata presented the current financial overview. Garrett outlined the status of active shipping contracts. Franklin raised 3 operational concerns that needed immediate attention. Sonia listened to all of it, asked questions when she needed clarity, and took notes in a leather journal she'd found in Arthur's desk, the kind with unlined pages and a strap that wrapped around the cover. By the time the room emptied, the sun had moved past the windows, and the city below was bathed in late morning light. Sonia stood at the window and looked out over Manhattan. Somewhere down there, in a bus station or a shelter or a rented room, Derek Harlan was starting over with nothing. She didn't feel sorry for him. She didn't feel victorious either. She felt something quieter than both of those things, a sense of distance, as if the person she had been a week ago was standing on the far side of a river she had already crossed. She tucked the journal under her arm and went to find Damien. There was still work to do. The helicopter lifted off from the private helipad on the roof of Vance Tower at 1:30 in the afternoon. Sonia sat by the window, watching Manhattan tilt and shrink beneath her as the aircraft banked south toward the Brooklyn waterfront. She had never been in a helicopter before. The noise was enormous, the vibration constant, and the view was the kind of thing that rearranges the way you think about distance. Damien sat across from her, a tablet in his lap, scrolling through operational reports with the focused efficiency of a man who processed information the way other people breathed. He wore a headset, and when he spoke, his voice came through her own headset, clear and close, cutting through the rotor noise like a knife through paper. "The primary logistics hub is on the waterfront near Red Hook," he said. "Your father built it in 2003. It handles about 40% of the corporation's East Coast freight volume, containerized cargo, cold storage, bonded warehousing, 1,200 employees across 3 shifts. Sonia looked down at the Brooklyn coastline as it expanded beneath them. She could see the harbor, the cranes, the long geometric rows of shipping containers stacked in colored blocks. Tugboats pushed barges through the gray-green water. Trucks crawled along access roads in orderly lines, loading and unloading in a rhythm that looked almost organic from this height, like the breathing of something massive and alive. "Who manages the facility?" she asked. "A man named Carl Dreyfus. He's been running it for 11 years.
Arthur hired him personally. He's one of the best port logistics operators on the East Coast, and he's loyal to the bone. Was he at the board meeting yesterday? No, Carl doesn't do boardrooms. He does docks, ships, and loading schedules. He'll be in steel-toed boots and a hard hat when we land, and he'll probably have grease on his hands. That's how you'll know you can trust him. The helicopter descended toward a marked landing zone on the roof of a long, flat-roofed warehouse near the water's edge. Sonia could see the Vance Corporation logo painted on the side of the building, the same lion and compass from the signet ring, rendered in white against a navy background. Seeing it that large, that permanent, bolted to the side of a building her father had constructed with his own ambition, made something tighten in her chest that she couldn't name. Carl Dreyfus was exactly what Damien described. A stocky man in his mid-50s, with sun-weathered skin, a thick grey moustache, and hands that looked like they'd been shaking hands with heavy machinery for 3 decades. He met them on the rooftop as the helicopter powered down, shook Sonia's hand firmly, and said 4 words. "Your dad was good people." Then he turned and led them inside. The tour took 2 hours. Carl walked Sonia through every section of the facility, the container yards, the cold storage units, the bonded warehouse where high-value cargo was held under customs seal, the dispatch office where shift coordinators managed the movement of 300 trucks across 8 states. He explained each operation in plain language, without condescension, the way a craftsman shows someone around a workshop. He pointed out the things that worked well and the things that needed fixing with equal honesty, and he answered every question Sonia asked without hedging. She asked a lot of questions. By the time they reached the waterfront office, a glass-walled room overlooking the loading docks, Sonia had filled 6 pages of Arthur's leather journal with notes. Cargo volumes, contract timelines, fleet maintenance schedules, staffing levels, seasonal fluctuation patterns. The information was dense and unfamiliar, but the underlying structure reminded her of something she recognized: the same basic architecture of any business, scaled up by a factor of 1,000. Inputs, outputs, margins, timing. The dealership had taught her more than Derek ever realized. She sat down at the desk in the waterfront office and opened the journal to a clean page. Damien and Carl stood across from her, waiting. "I've been thinking about this since yesterday," she said. "About what I want this company to look like going forward." She drew a line down the center of the page. On the left side, she wrote the word current. On the right, she wrote future. "My father spent his last years pulling the organization toward legitimacy. Damien told me the transition was about 70% complete. I want to finish it. All of it. Every contract, every arrangement, every handshake deal that falls outside of clean, legal commercial operations. I want it restructured or closed." Carl folded his arms and leaned against the window frame. "That's a tall order. Some of those arrangements go back 20 years. The people on the other end of them won't be happy to see the terms change." "I understand that, and I'm not talking about burning bridges overnight. I want Renata's team to conduct a full review of every active contract and flag anything that carries legal risk. Anything flagged gets renegotiated within 90 days. If the other party won't agree to clean terms, we walk. We'll lose some revenue in the short term, but we'll gain something more valuable." "Which is?" Carl asked. "Sustainability. My father built something that could survive him. I want to build something that can survive scrutiny. Any kind of scrutiny, legal, financial, public. If a reporter or an auditor or a federal investigator walked into this building tomorrow and opened every file in every cabinet, I want them to find nothing but clean paper." Carl studied her for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. "Arthur said something like that to me once, about 5 years ago. We were standing right about where you're sitting, looking out at the water. He said the hardest part of building something big is knowing when to stop building and start cleaning." Sonia looked out the window. The harbor was golden in the afternoon light, the water catching the sun in long, shimmering bands. A container ship was moving slowly toward open water, its hull riding low under the weight of its cargo. She watched it until it passed behind a row of cranes and disappeared from view.
The security network stays, she said, turning back to Damien. I want your team exactly where it is, protecting the facilities, the staff, the supply chain, and the family. But the enforcement side gets restructured under Renata's compliance framework. Everything documented, everything above board. Damien nodded. I'll work with Renata to draft the new protocols. We can have a preliminary framework ready within 2 weeks. Good. Sonia closed the journal and stood. And I want one more thing. Name it. I want the Hadley Group trace completed by the time I get back to the estate tonight. Whoever was paying Derek for information about me is still inside this organization, and I want to know who they are before they know I'm looking. Damien's expression tightened, a small, controlled shift that Sonia had learned to read as confirmation that her instincts were tracking with his own. Oren's team has been on it since yesterday, he said. We're close. Close isn't finished. No, Damien agreed. It isn't. Sonia tucked the journal under her arm and shook Carl's hand. He held it for an extra second and looked her in the eye. You're going to be fine, he said. Arthur always said the hard part isn't knowing what to do. It's deciding you're the one who's going to do it. Sonia held his gaze. He was right. She walked out of the waterfront office and back toward the helipad, the afternoon sun warm on her face, the harbour stretching out beside her in every direction. Behind her, the Vance Corporation hummed with the quiet, relentless energy of a machine that had been running for 40 years and was now, for the first time, being steered by the hands its builder had always intended. The gardens of the Vance estate were at their finest in the last hour before sunset. The groundskeeper, an elderly man named Wallace, who had tended these grounds for 27 years, had planted the flower beds in a pattern that caught the evening light at precise angles, so that as the sun dropped toward the tree line, the entire garden seemed to glow from within. Roses, lavender, white hydrangeas, and tall stalks of foxglove lined the stone pathways that wound between old oak trees and low hedgerows trimmed with surgical care. Sonia walked the main path alone, her shoes off, the cool grass soft between her toes. She carried Arthur's leather journal in one hand and the signet ring on her right finger, and she let the quiet settle over her like a blanket she hadn't known she needed. 1 week. 7 days since Derek's hand had connected with her face in their living room in Oak Ridge. 7 days since the sound of tires on asphalt changed the entire trajectory of her life. She tried to measure the distance between the woman who had stood in that living room holding overdue credit card statements and the woman standing here now, barefoot in the gardens of a country estate worth more than most people would earn in 10 lifetimes. And the measurement didn't work. The two women didn't belong on the same scale, and yet they were the same person. That was the part that kept catching her off guard, the realization that nothing about her had actually changed. She was the same woman who balanced books and filed paperwork and clipped coupons and drove a 12-year-old Honda. The same woman who had spent 11 years being told she wasn't enough, absorbing it, carrying it, folding it into the shape of her daily life until it became invisible. The money was new. The name was new. The organization, the estate, the people who now looked to her for direction. All of it was new. But she was the same person she had always been. The only difference was that now, for the first time, the world around her was arranged in a way that allowed her to be that person, fully. She stopped at a stone bench near the edge of the lake and sat down. The water was still and dark, reflecting the sky in deep shades of amber and violet. A pair of swans moved near the far shore, gliding in slow parallel lines that left faint V-shaped ripples spreading behind them. She opened the journal and turned to the last page she had written on, her notes from the waterfront facility, the restructuring plan, the compliance timeline. She flipped past it to a blank page and sat for a moment with the pencil resting against her lower lip, thinking. Then she wrote 2 words at the top of the page. Thank you. She didn't know who the words were for. Her father, maybe, for spending his final years building a fortress around a daughter he never got to hold again. Her mother, for having the courage to disappear and the love to keep the secret for 30 years. Damien for keeping a promise to a dying man and honoring it with a precision that bordered on devotion. Or maybe the words were for herself, for the version of Sonia who had endured 11 years of Derek Harlan and come out the other side with her instincts intact, her mind sharp, and her spine unbroken. She closed the journal and watched the swans until she heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. Damien approached with his usual measured stride, his jacket removed, his sleeves rolled to the forearms, the most informal she had ever seen him. He carried a small wooden box in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. He sat down beside her on the bench without asking, which told her something about how the dynamic between them had shifted over the past week. On the first day, he had bowed. Now he sat next to her like a colleague, a partner, someone who had earned the right to share the bench. "Oren finished the Hadley Group trace an hour ago," he said. Sonia turned to face him. "And?" "The shell company was registered by a man named Philip Dern. He was a mid-level financial analyst in the Vance Corporation's compliance division. He'd been with the organization for 8 years. Was? He resigned 40 minutes ago, after Oren's team presented him with the evidence. He admitted to facilitating the information sale through Derek, using the Hadley Group as a payment channel. He was working with 2 of the faction members who originally pressured your mother to leave, both of whom are now retired and living abroad. They wanted to keep you from surfacing as an heir so they could push for a board-controlled succession after Arthur's death." Sonia absorbed this quietly. "What happens to them?" "Dern has signed a full confession and a cooperation agreement. Margaret's team is preparing civil recovery actions against the 2 retired faction members. Their remaining financial ties to the organization will be severed by end of week." He paused. "They're old men living on pensions in Portugal. They're finished." Sonia nodded slowly. The last loose thread pulled clean. Damien set the wooden box on the bench between them and opened it. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, were 2 items: a heavy brass key with an ornate bow and a round wax seal stamp bearing the Vance family crest. "The master key opens every property in the Vance portfolio," Damien said. "The seal is ceremonial. Arthur used it on formal correspondence and major contracts. He kept both of these in his personal safe, and his instructions were that they be delivered to you on the day the organization was fully secured under your authority." Sonia lifted the key from the box. It was heavier than she expected, warm from the velvet, solid in a way that made it feel like it had been cast from something stronger than brass. She turned it over in her fingers, studying the lion and compass engraved into the bow. "And the envelope?" she asked. Damien handed it to her. It was sealed with red wax, stamped with the same crest. Her name was written across the front in a handwriting she had never seen before, tall, angular letters pressed hard into the paper with the confidence of a man who had spent his life making his words count. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. It was short, 4 lines written in the same heavy hand. She read it once, then again. Then she folded it carefully and pressed it against her chest, the way she had pressed the photograph on the first night, holding it close to the heartbeat that connected her to every version of herself she had ever been and every version she was about to become. She didn't share what the letter said. Some words belong only to the person they were written for. Damien didn't ask. They sat together on the stone bench as the sun dropped below the tree line and the garden settled into the soft blue light of early evening. The swans had drifted to the center of the lake, their white feathers luminous against the darkening water. Somewhere in the house behind them, Wallace was turning on the porch lamps one by one, their glow spreading across the lawn in warm, golden circles. Sonia placed the key and the seal back in the wooden box and closed the lid. She slipped the letter into the journal, stood, and looked out across the estate. The gardens, the lake, the stone house with its lit windows, the rolling acres of land that stretched toward the horizon in every direction. All of it, hers. She turned to Damien. "First thing tomorrow, I want a meeting with Garrett and Carl about the Q3 shipping contracts. Then, I want Renata to walk me through the compliance restructuring timeline, and I want to visit the Philadelphia and Baltimore facilities by end of week."
Damien stood and buttoned his cuffs. "I'll have the schedule ready by morning." "Good." She tucked the journal under her arm, picked up her shoes from the grass, and started walking back toward the house. Halfway up the path, she stopped and looked over her shoulder. "Damien." "Yes?" "Thank you for keeping your promise to him." Damien held her gaze for a moment. The last light of the day caught the edge of his face, and she saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. A quiet, unguarded relief, the kind that comes when a weight you've been carrying for years is finally set down. "It was the easiest promise I ever made," he said. Sonia smiled, a real one, full and unhurried, and walked into the house to begin her first full evening as the head of the Vance legacy. Behind her, the garden lights glowed against the gathering dusk, and the estate settled into the kind of silence that doesn't come from emptiness, but from everything finally being in its right place.